Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions. Get a free training on the blended practice model by following at Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Alyssa, welcome to the podcast. It's always great to see you that way. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the incredible work you've been doing with Beyond the Athlete, would you mind filling in a bit about who you are and this kind of journey that you've been on that way?
Yeah, so I am a registered nurse and a board certified coach working with former athletes, helping them navigate life after sports. So, whether that is developing a consistent routine, redefining confidence, setting goals that are your own for the first time, we kind of are a one-stop shop for all things former athletes. Initially started out working in the hospital. Oh, played soccer. So, I too am a former athlete or is a NARP, non-athletic regular person. Um, Started off playing soccer, worked in the ICU, and really just copied and pasted what worked in sports into my career. And that absolutely did not work. I quit very quickly, got burnt out in my job. I was successful on paper, but I'd go home and nothing really was exciting. I wasn't investing in myself. I didn't have personal goals. My routine had absolutely no structure. And I realized I don't know if I was feeling that way, there was no way. It was just me. Down a research rabbit hole and found no existing support for former athletes, and so that's kind of how Beyond the Athlete was started. I've been doing it full time for a little over 2 years, and it is my child.
I love that. And it sounds like this was not something that you had planned out for a long time. It sounds like you kind of had this kind of direction that you thought life was going to take you. And then at some point along the way, we decided to take a left turn at Albuquerque, for lack of a better way to put it, and kind of embark on this journey to provide things for former athletes that they often don't
Yeah.
get in enough of a quality or quantity to satisfy what life demands of them, for lack of a better way to put it. And it's so interesting to me because I think a lot of people go through life thinking they've got this like perfect plan for everything and they know exactly what's going to happen, right? I'm going to be married by this age, have kids by this age, have, this big giant house in the middle of,
Totally.
I don't know, freaking Tennessee or something like that. And then somewhere along the line, things kind of change a little bit and that kind of like vision gets shaken a little bit. Not to say that it's like deteriorated or it's kind of turned into nothing, if you will, but it's just, it looks different than you originally thought it was that way. And it certainly sounds like that's the case for you. And it sounds like that's the case for a lot of the athletes that you work with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I quit my job at a coffee shop before with like um after a month of not making any income from my business. And of course, I try not to only talk through the lens of a former athlete because I obviously am so much more than that, but I also know it's the easiest way to describe it to other people who may be athletes or former athletes. The path is clear when you're an athlete. Your goals are clear, your metrics of success are clear. There's always another level to become more elite. And because that is like the space you grow up in, achieving a goal, winning the game, get into college, get a scholarship, win conference, it transposes into other areas of your life. So I always knew what to expect when I was playing soccer, but also every choice I ever made was because I thought I was supposed to, not even just in sports. Like I got my degree in nursing because I knew it was stable. I went to University of Florida because it was a good school. I started working at the hospital I did because it was ranked high. And I made all these choices that I thought I was supposed to make. And then all of a sudden I was 20, well, however old I was, 23, and I was standing, metaphorically on the road, looking into the horizon, and what I saw my life would be back pain, income capped, didn't really have personal goals outside of work. And I was like, whoa, this this is not like this was the American dream. This is what I worked so hard for. And started as and stopped a graduate program. I started seeking it. I thought the next path was education. And for me personally, it was really stepping outside what other people expected and defining what I wanted for myself, which I had literally never done before up until I was like 23 years old.
A lot of athletes do have things that are predefined for them. However, I feel like there's an element of control to the athlete along that process as well, right? We've talked with so many athletes on the podcast that on one hand, they start their sports so early in life, this early sports specialization, and they feel like it's
Hmm.
almost an expectation for them to do it. However, a
Absolutely.
lot of them, by the same token, start multiple sports early in life, and they kind of have this ability to choose between those two or three for themselves. Hey, which one do you like the most? And some athletes have even kind of changed their mind and gone back. And, maybe they go to college and they think they're going to go into gymnastics and they take their own kind of metaphorical left turn and then they end up on the track and field pole vault team or something along those lines, right? So it's interesting because it seems like there's this almost like balance and blend, if you will, of expectations in a predefined direction while also having your own free will to make decisions along the way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that ability to execute. No one's going to make you show up day in and day out. That is a choice you get to make for yourself, and you get to decide how much you invest into what it is you're doing. Um, but again, sports are win-lose. So yes, you're deciding how much to invest in it, but you also kind of know what it is you're stepping into, if that makes sense.
Sports have an outcome that's either a win or a loss. I mean, some sports technically you can
Tie.
tie, but for the most part, it's a win or a loss. And as a result, it becomes almost binary, like ones and zeros, yeses and
Hmm.
nos to everything that way. Do you feel like a lot of athletes, or did you yourself kind of think about things in that binary nature a lot, where everything is either a yes or a no, and maybe didn't necessarily find the middle ground in a lot of situations, or didn't necessarily pursue all the various shades of gray that exist between that world of black and white?
Definitely. There is so much black and white thinking in the sports world because it literally is, like you said, it's you win or you lose. This is something I see really often with former athletes when we're trying to get into like a consistent workout routine, just as an example. We think a consistent workout routine is 7 days a week. I have to move my body every day. And then what ends up happening is if we don't move every day, we don't go at all. And then it's a week where we haven't gone to the gym. And in our brain, instead of saying, well, no big deal, it's I am not fit. I am not consistent. It's not even this like, well, maybe I had a week that wasn't consistent. It was no, I am starting completely over. I am inconsistent. I don't know what I'm doing. And then we flip back into the all, start exercising 7 days a week. And there's this pattern of, yeah, black and white. You're 100% committed or you're 0% committed. And yeah, for myself, it's funny to reflect on how often I use all or nothing statements. And even in my personal life, my partner, I'll say like, I'm always the one to do the dishes. I am not always the one to do the dishes, but it's that statement that I always am the one to do X, Y, and Z. It's kind of funny. Not, I mean, funny, but not funny.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's that concept of thinking that everything is all or nothing, like you mentioned that way, and understanding that there's a lot of different kind of existences along that continuum, for lack of a better way to
Hmm.
put it. And I think that this is something that is attempted to be integrated into the sports and athletic world. However, I think a lot of the times we kind of missed the mark on it, right? Like I've had so many coaches tell me, yeah, we tell them to go 60% today, or we tell them to go 80% at that drill, but no one ever teaches them what 80% is and what it feels
Yeah,
like, one. And two, there's no consequences or repercussions. There's nothing to discourage you from not going 80%, right? If you take that and you go 100% or you go 10%, there's nothing to discourage that type of behavior. So it's one of those things that you almost have to, as an athlete, find a way to hold yourself accountable to those objective standards that are expected of you that way, because it's so easy to go off track on one hand. And the other thing is, you also have this kind of rise in what I call questioning authority, if you will, where it's like, hey, the coach might say go 80%, but does the coach know my body? Does he know how I'm feeling today, or whatever, that way? And it opens up this whole kind of concept of, can we even trust what those objective markers that are given to us are, or do we actually have to kind of rise up and take things into our own hands, if you will?
Yeah, it brings up a term I like to use, which is dialectical thinking, which is the idea that two things can be true at once. And it kind of removes that either or mentality of I have to go 100% or I am not going to be played the next game. And you do often have coaches like, I mean, the reality is, as an athlete, if someone works harder than you and performs better, they're going to replace you, in the grand scheme of things. And so I add in the grand scheme of things because that doesn't necessarily have to mean day to day, and you always have to go 100%. And that's where dialectical thinking can come in. Giving 100% effort may allow me to perform better today, and that isn't what's in my best interest in the grand scheme of things. Or pushing to 80% today might be best for me, and maybe there's another day I can push a little bit harder. So by encompassing the like both sides of the spectrum and giving room for both, it does allow, like you said, the gray area. And referring to the authority that you mentioned, coach doesn't always know what's best for me, and there's a reason that they're here. So maybe there's room to listen to them. Or coach wants me to push 80% and I respect what they are saying. And maybe today 60% is good for me and I have to do what's best for me. So there can be room for both, but that's so hard because it does challenge what that like win loss black and white thinking is that's ingrained into us, that like 110% mentality.
One of the things that comes up a lot when I'm talking with athletes is the carryover from sport to life, or sport to career, and the lessons that they learn from sport that they can carry over into the rest of their life that way. And I've had conversations about this with a lot of different individuals where they say it's not the sport that teaches the lessons. It's the people, it's the
Hmm.
captains, it's the coaching staff, it's the, whoever you get involved with during that time that really teaches you those lessons. It's not just playing the sport, it's more about the human element that the sport opens up to for you, if you will, that way. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Do you feel like it's the sport? Do you feel like it's the people? Is it a mix of both? Where do we kind of sit on that continuum? And on top of that, what kind of things do you feel like athletes often tell you they carry over to life after sport very well versus ones that maybe they struggle with a bit more?
I like to say that sport gives you an environment to highlight your strengths, but your strengths are yours. They are not your athlete selves. And so while you may feel your most confident self in the environment of sport and you have people around you who are highlighting those strengths or empowering you or motivating you, at the end of the day, that experience is yours and you do get to carry it wherever you want to in your life. I think it is both though, right? When we talk about right nature versus nurture, like yes, those are yours and your environment does matter. So surrounding yourself with people that do empower you, surrounding yourself with other people who have a growth mindset, it does challenge you to tap your belief of what you're capable of and push that extra mile. And so environment, I think the expectation is the fact that there are goals and that there is structure in sports and also as a human. You have these traits that can be brought into all areas of life. And answering the second part of what you're asking, what do I see former athletes striving in versus where do they struggle? Language I really, really like to use is execution and implementation versus structure. The athlete mindset allows you to have discipline, to have motivation, to be a team player, to be a leader. These are all traits that allow high level execution. However, what ends up being missing from a lot of former athletes is our ability to create the structure to execute in, to set the meaningful goals that excite us when we get up in the morning. And the reason this is because sports already has that in place. You already have your support network as an athlete. You have your goals pre-written for you, like we were just saying. And not only that, you have other people depending on you. And so there is this disconnect where how do you bring that athlete mindset where you are absolutely probably going to be the hardest working person in the room. How can we make sure it's not non-directional effort where you're burning yourself out trying to execute things that don't bring you passion? And how do we that high level execution with rest, with recovery, with purpose, with values? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And on top of that, you're being expected high level execution, especially at some of these higher levels of sport that way. However, one of the things that came up in a podcast recording we were just doing yesterday was, we have these extremely high expectations of athletes and we're treating them like they're fully grown, fully developed adults, when in reality, 18, 19, 20-year-olds don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. So we're expecting them to make high level decisions when we have to remind ourselves their brain is not even fully developed yet. It's not fully developed until they're in their mid to late 20s, a lot of cases that way.
Hmm.
So we almost have this mismatch, in my opinion, from a neural standpoint or a neuroscience standpoint, where we're expecting high level executive type function, executive type decisions under high pressure, when in reality, that part of the brain is still developing, it's still forming, and it's still listening to everything that's going on. So it's kind of this weird situation where, on one hand, we know what they have to do from a sports standpoint. On the other hand, we also have to pay attention and pay respect to literally the body's own physiological development that way, and understand that, we're not going to have perfection in a 19-year-old athlete. We're also not going to have ideal decision making 100% of the time
Right.
in the 19 to 20-year-old athlete. And that's okay. I think, in my opinion, more poor outcomes happen in sport when we neglect that side of things and expect them to be at the level of someone who's maybe a 35-year-old professional athlete that's played the sport for longer than the other athlete has been alive. There's a drastic difference there. And I think that now more than ever, with this culture of almost treating the college athlete just as comparable to a professional athlete, we have to understand the differences that are literally in their physiological development, and then what implications that has as well. Like, we can't expect, the 18-year-old kid who just got paid millions of dollars on an NIL deal to have the same level of responsibility with that money compared to someone who's maybe 35 and 40 who's got a fully developed prefrontal cortex. Now, on the flip side, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be bad with their money. I'm just saying that, some of them are at this point where they're still developing and still maturing. And for some reason, we often forget that and hold them to the same standard of individuals who have far more developed neurological systems than they do.
Yeah, not to mention that when you're at that age, you're still developing your identity. And if every time you've been celebrated and told basically you're a good person or a good job, I'm proud of you, is when you've given 100% to something or only when you've achieved goals or been a top performer, then the whole identity and complex of like what it is to be a person is, well, I'm only of value when I am executing at a high level. And there really isn't much, and I know this that I'm talking like for myself, but for so many former athletes, like I have the conversation all the time where if they don't feel like they're executing at a high level, they don't feel like they're good enough as a person, or they don't feel like they're contributing to society, or they're not even sure where they get their value or their confidence from if they are not being told they're doing a good job. And that kind of translates into every area of life. And if we, I mean, NIL is a whole other world. We talk about like like responsibility. Mindset, like the pressure, like if anything, the one thing we are teaching these high level athletes is they are of value when they perform in high level, high pressure situations. But hopefully that isn't what their life is all the time, but they'll keep putting themselves in those situations unless we teach them that that's not the only place where they can get their worth and recognition from.
As to your point, so many athletes feel like everything is rooted within sports for them. And it goes back
Yeah.
to, again, what we talked about before. I think recognizing the human element of sport, and going back to what I mentioned before about, like, some individuals feel like the value of sport is not just the sport alone, but the people within the sport, if you will. I think a lot of times it just comes to us rewiring and changing the way we think about sport. Because when we hear sport, we think about the sport itself. We think about lacrosse or soccer or football or basketball or whatever that way. That's what we think about. We don't think about the players that are on the team. We don't think about the connections and relations they
Yeah.
formed. We don't think about the opportunities that their families got because of that. We don't think about the relations they built with coaching staff and so on that way, good, bad, or indifferent. We just don't think about those things. And it's interesting how a lot of times, to your point, and I hear this a lot talking with athletes as well, their identity feels like it's just rooted in sport, when in reality it could be rooted in the people that are within the sport and rooted around the people that they've gotten to connect with because of the sport. And then we kind of view sport under this lens of opportunity to express yourself and do all these things, kind of like you mentioned before, as opposed to sport being the end all be all 100% of the time.
Yeah, there's a theory of well-being called the PERMA model, PERMA, and the theory says that by having each component of that model, you are most likely to be happy in life. Well, there have been other papers that sports actually fills every single piece of the PERMA model, and I'm going to do my absolute best to remember every single one. The first one, I believe, is positive emotion. So, are you having moments of joy? Are you having moments of celebration? And the answer, very simply, is yes. When you're an athlete, you have these super high highs in games. You're celebrating, you're cheering your teammates on, you're laughing in the locker room. And then E is engagement. So, are you fully engrossed in what you're doing? Does your brain turn off and you just fully immerse yourself in the sport or in the activity? The answer is yes. R is relationships. So, specifically, I think meaningful relationships. That might be M, but I'm going off of memory. But basically, are you surrounding yourself with people who are working on things, positive relationships? They're uplifting you, you're uplifting them. There's a growth mindset. You're surrounded with people who are working on things. The answer is yes when you're an athlete. And then M, I believe, is meaning. Side note, might be getting these wrong. Yeah, is there meaning? Is there purpose? Is there definition behind what you're doing? And with sports, yeah, like you're participating in something that is more than just yourself. You're contributing to a team, you're contributing to your school pride. People are coming and cheering you on. You are connected to something more than just who you are as a person, kind of like what you're saying. You are in this environment where you're part of something amazing when you're an athlete. And then I want to say that A is acknowledgement, but that's probably
Accomplishment.
accomplishment. Okay, accomplishment. So are you able to celebrate, to win, to achieve, to work hard and see the fruits of your labor play out? And the answer is yes. And so kind of to your point, sports is more than just a game, and it gives you the foundation of what it takes to have a happy and successful life, and also to bring it outside of sports, it's something that's replicatable. And it's something that you get to carry with yourself anywhere you go. It's a great blueprint and proof of what you're capable of and what life can be like if you allow yourself to recreate it.
Absolutely. And as you outlined, the PERMA model, from positive emotions, engagement, and relationships and meaning, all the way up to that kind of sense or feeling of accomplishment, can be very present for athletes. And it's
Yeah, it
easy to
can.
think about how that can be applied to sport. But in the back of my mind, I think about some of the different athlete situations that have come up where those things were actually not being
Yeah.
met, and the relationships weren't quite as positive as they wanted them to be, and the experiences weren't quite as good as they thought that they were going to be. And that feeling of accomplishment wasn't there because, oh, my team just won one game across an entire season.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you go from playing a college sport to looking to transfer because for some reason that team culture and environment just didn't mesh with what you were after, and it wasn't providing all of those things that you needed that way. And this is something I talked about at length with Ron Sayers at the start of the year that way. Amazing conversation with a great mind in this space that way. And one of the things we talked about is, this mismatch that we see occurring at a very high level, at least in our opinions, is not due to the fault of the athlete or the fault of the coach. It's due to a mismatch between cultures and what they value and what they find important, right? To one, maybe the athlete says, you know what, for me, I need to be winning in order to feel
Yeah.
important and to feel accomplishment. And maybe the coach is saying, hey, look, we're going to build for the future and we might have a rough year or two, but we're going to get to that point. But to the athlete that just wants to win now, they don't want to build. They don't want to work towards something. They just want what they're after right this second. And that's a just, on the spot example of mismatch of values, mismatch of cultures and beliefs. And I think the more clearly you can articulate these things from the start, the more likely you are to have that entire experience of well-being throughout your athletic career. And I think a lot of the time people don't do enough prep work and don't do enough of their due diligence to really tease these things out. They kind of assume a lot and fill in the gaps on
Yeah.
their own. I mean, we're all guilty of it, right? Like I'm guilty of it right now as I'm apartment hunting, right? It's like, oh, well, this one looks good, checks all these boxes. And then I start scrolling through the thing and realize they don't list air conditioning as one of their things that they provide. So to me, that's a little concerning thinking about moving south in the middle of summertime to a building that doesn't have air conditioning. That's something that I value. And I assumed it would be there because it's 2025, but guess what? It's not. So understand the more clearly you articulate these things, and I mean everything from
Yeah.
the start, the better you are, the more likely you are to experience that full state of well-being in everything that you do in sport and beyond.
Yeah, there is definitely, I mean, it brings me back to the black and white thinking. Like it either has to be 100% perfect or it's not good enough. Or where my brain goes to is like expectation and pressure. One of the biggest things that I see hold back athletes and former athletes from enjoying themselves is expectation and judgment of how things are going. There's this voice that, oh, that wasn't enough. You're not working hard enough. You need to be doing better. You could have done more. Why didn't so and so why didn't coach call me in that game? There must be something wrong with me. And there's this whole complex that ends up being tied to, like you said, fulfillment and worth. Uh, when there's that expectation and pressure and voice in our head that's telling us we're not doing enough. And I do also want to acknowledge as well that not every environment is there to treat you as a human being in sports. And it is changing. Thankfully, it is changing. But you do see like there are some not amazing coaches out there. There are some schools. I mean, let's talk about like this life after sports prep. This isn't talked about in 90% of schools. Most of these schools don't talk about what it is that comes in life after sports. And those resources are just now after COVID being brought to light as something that needs to exist there. The term expectation, like, yeah, like you're saying, like, what do you truly expect of yourself, of your team, of your coach, of your teammates, of your school? And then follow-up question, is it realistic? Because 9 times out of 10, the expectations we have of ourselves are completely unrealistic.
Absolutely. No, you're spot on with that. And I realize as we're talking about this, you've got such extensive personal experiences for yourself with this. Has there been anything thus far, just kind of thinking about your own sporting career that way, moments where, hey, maybe we weren't in that full level of well-being and engagement, or maybe we experienced a situation where kind of that long-term athlete or long-term human mindset, I should say, maybe wasn't present that way? And if so, kind of what was your kind of impression and all at the time? And then what would you do differently, kind of if like you were in kind of like head position right now to kind of change the narrative around those situations?
I want to add, like, I don't think every anything is ever 100% fulfilling. So sports for me was probably everything I ever wanted to be 70 to 80% of the time. And of course, there was that 30 to 20% where I was not in the mood for practice. I was playing like crap and my mindset was in the toilet too. Like it that existed and it's perfectly normal to expect something to be 100% amazing 100% of the time. Like we were saying, is that black and white thinking? But to answer your question, I did not have a great mindset playing as an athlete. It's funny now being on the other side and having all of this like experience working with former athletes and working on myself and healing my own perspective and perfectionist tendencies. Like if I had a bad game, I couldn't let it go. I absolutely could not let it go. If I wasn't a starter, it would. eat me alive. And I remember, honestly, as the competition got higher, my abilities got worse. I would not be able to, and it was because my mindset would go. I'd start questioning, okay, am I going to be the one to get to this ball first? That person, she's quick. Is she quicker than me? I would really be in my head, and then I wouldn't be able to enjoy it. I start to question my abilities. And when we were in nationals one time, I think we were in Arizona. So we were in Arizona for nationals. The first game I played like crap, absolute crap, and I got benched over half the game. And I'm a starter most of the time. Like I usually start every game, or I started every game, right? This is in like 20, whatever, 2018. I usually started every single game. And there I was riding the bench in the biggest game that we've had all season. And so I go to the coach's hotel after, actually. I went to his room and I said, hey, like, why? What did I do? What was going on? And it's interesting because he said, "Oh, it was just that game. Like, we'll get you back in. Don't worry about it. Shake it off. You can't take it personally." I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember walking out of that room and thinking to myself, "Okay, I'm gonna start the next game." And I didn't. And I basically, and like, you asked me what I'd do differently. In my mind, that moment where I didn't play the first game, had conversation with coach, who I don't think gave me the feedback I needed in the moment, which would have been maybe some like conversation around mindset, like, hey, you're playing like butt right now. Like you're straight up playing bad. Like you're playing bad. You're in your head. You've got to get out of your head. I never once ever had anyone say that to me. Um, And then when I didn't play after the conversation, I said, wow, I must suck. It just validated all of those thoughts I had already been having that hadn't been dealt with. And so basically every year we went to nationals, I wouldn't play. I would start all season, I was captain. We'd go to the high level competition and I would fold under the pressure. I wish someone would have talked to me about performance anxiety, which I had no concept of when I was playing. I wish I would have been given constructive feedback on my performance and not been like basically like shooed away and like positive reinforcement that wasn't what I needed. And I don't know, it's interesting being on the other side. That's super long-winded, but definitely what a moment that I think about in my experience as a player and when it comes to like that positive mindset and fulfillment. I was absolutely crushed. I felt like it defined my abilities and who I was. I felt embarrassed around my teammates who usually saw me playing well, and I just wanted to like run and hide.
Quick break, because if you're a rehab professional sick of burnout, this could be your answer. Engage Movement's blended practice model is a proven system built by Dr. Ray Gorman, a PT who walked away from the 55-hour-a-week grind and built a blended practice model that doubled his income while working less than 25 hours a week, and he didn't have to rely on the traditional way of selling sessions to do so. It's all about blending remote and in-person services, stacking monthly recurring revenue, and building a business that finally supports your life, not the other way around. This model isn't just theory. Real providers, including myself, are creating lives of freedom and flexibility without being tied to their schedule. And as a listener, you get free access to the complete training. DM my name, Dan, to @RayGormanDPT on Instagram and receive your free breakdown on the model. Yeah, you bring up such an amazing point with that, and I appreciate your transparency as well throughout that. It's this conversation around, how do we provide for the athlete, not just from the physical sense, but maybe more so on the psychological and physiological sense as well,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of times we think, oh, well, we're a coach, we're a strength coach, an AT, a PT, assistant coach, whatever your title is that way. And we think our whole role in relation to sport is the physical side. Hey, we need to make them physically better at this drill, or physically more conditioned, or physically stronger, or physically able to return to sport after this injury, whatever it is that way. A lot of times we make the mistake of thinking it's so physical in nature, when in
Yeah.
reality, I'll argue that the neuropsychological or neurophysiological side of things is, if not as important or more important than that physical element to them. And this is something I've had discussions at lengths with a guy named Andrew Hauser about lately, just from how much we've missed the mark and even misunderstood this side of sports and athletics that way, where we
Yeah.
think we know what's going on from a physiological and psychological standpoint, when in reality, we're so far off. Even some of those like great minds in the space are really not necessarily aligned with what's actually going on right now. And it's concerning, right? So, take, for example, this kind of belief that athletes are just stressed out and mentally burnt out all the time. And they're in this kind of stuck in this sympathetic state, if you will, that way, where we are telling them, oh, your body's stuck in this fight or flight mode. And what you need to do is learn how to relax and chill out and all these different things that way. On top of that, you think about some of these other things under that umbrella and going back to that sympathetic kind of fight or flight state. For some reason, majority of the athletes, if not all athletes, are getting overly parasympathetic at times of competition. So they're actually getting too comfortable. They're relaxing too much, and they're not in that go mode nearly as much as they should be that way. So it becomes this kind of like weird continuum where we're not even able to fully agree on what the issue is for athletes from a physiological and psychological standpoint. And I think that the more we actually emphasize conversations with athletes and getting to hear what they're going on and then pair it with objective measures that we should be assessing but aren't. Simple things like blood oxygen and carbon dioxide levels.
Mm.
Simple things like, hey, what was their sleep score that day? Things that a lot of us have really neglected in favor of some of these cool, new, trendy, fancy technologies. And it's like, even something as simple as body temperature on a day-to-day basis can give you a lot of indications objectively as to how someone is doing. And when you pair those things with those subjective conversations that you form, because hopefully you've developed a good relation with your athletes, and hopefully your athletes have learned to trust and respect you and whatever your role is within the sport that way, I think it opens up the door to solve a lot of these issues. But until then, I think ultimately we need to find a way to get out of our own way and admit that we don't know everything, we don't have all the answers, and there's still a lot to figure out. But until we do that, we're going to continue to try and intervene and continue to try and make assumptions off of a model that's relatively broken and not providing everything the athlete needs.
Where my brain, that was long. That was good. I'm like, what's my rebuttal? Just kidding, no rebuttal. But as you were talking, the word that comes to mind, and from my experience too, working with former athletes, is apathy. There's almost this disconnect when there's time to execute. There's this whole mental and emotional, you talk about like the sympathetic, parasympathetic. It's almost like they completely disconnect from the process in times of high stress, where opting into it would mean like pushing your limit. And where my brain always goes, and I see it with former athletes too, we see this a lot. I'm unmotivated. I can't get myself started. It's like, well, you don't believe you can. And I know I'm not talking about literal measurable results, but from my like subjective conversations, if you don't believe you can perform to the top level, oftentimes we just completely disconnect. We don't want to try. We don't want to put our effort subconsciously, right? This isn't like conscious behavior, but I see that like self-sabotage all the time with former athletes who say they want a goal, but don't actually put themselves in like, yeah, they can't get themselves to care enough on a deeper level to activate that like stress response. Does that make sense? Then we're getting like very high level.
Well, it's also just knowing that you have that background working in nursing, which is also like high stakes, high stress, but also like you have an understanding of how the body works physiologically, the underlying
Yeah.
anatomy, and so on that way. And it's just like there is, in my opinion, a bit of a mismatch that exists between the interventions that we're providing to people and the outcomes of it. And I mean, I don't want to steer this down like a whole healthcare discussion that way, because that could take many more hours. But in
Yeah.
relation to the sport element of it that way, like I think we ultimately have to ask ourselves, like, are the things that we're doing, the words that we're saying, the actions that we take, are they truly in line with what's best for that athlete on all aspects, not just the physical, which is where our mind tends to go, but on some of those deeper things like the physiological and the psychological element as well. Because
Right.
ultimately, those physiological and psychological elements will dictate the physical, right? I've had a number of conversations with an individual who we've recorded a few podcasts on that she shared this. She talks about how the phrase, talent beats, hard work or hard work beats
Hard work.
talent when talent doesn't work hard. And it's like the dumbest thing ever because there's some athletes that are so gifted and so talented that they don't have to work as hard as others, and they're just
I mean, look at
naturally that
Messi.
much better. Like they're, it's not to say they didn't put
Yeah,
in the work, but it's to say that their talent is on such another level that someone who doesn't have some of those predispositions for sport will not be able to catch up to them in a reasonable
totally.
time. Maybe if given an infinite amount of time, they'll be able to get there. But some people are just on a completely separate level from others that way. And that's okay. It's okay to have athletes amongst different levels. It's okay to have different experiences and talents and backgrounds and so on that way. But if we're not providing for each individual athlete with what they need physiologically and psychologically in that moment, then we're doing them a disservice because, yeah, they might not have the potential to be that skilled physically,
Yeah,
but maybe they can get into a psychological state or psychological mindset where they're able to hang with someone like that or shut them down for a game or
right.
something along those lines. But we just don't think about that. We only think about physical skill and we don't think about what's going on within the body, if you will.
Totally. And I also go into longevity, and is what we're teaching athletes going to support their overall health and wellness in the long term? There's a study that showed athletes were not any more likely to continue physical activity after sports compared to non-athletes, which is kind of crazy.
And building off that a little bit more, Alyssa, in relation to those long term outcomes and long term kind of thoughts and mindsets that way, you mentioned finances earlier, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts now in relation to kind of this financial situation a lot of athletes find themselves in, whether that's in the NIL era getting a big payout, or maybe it's on the flip side, hey, school costs 80 grand a year now. How am I going to be able to afford this? I feel like we see a little bit of a discrepancy in the sports world and athlete world right now, where some are graduating with millions in the bank and others are graduating with millions, well, not quite millions, but hundreds of thousands in debt, if you will, that way. I'm interested to hear kind of your thoughts on how do you kind of go about coaching and helping athletes to kind of at least start setting themselves up to be in a decent spot financially for the rest of their life.
It's a loaded question because we can talk about the systemic failures of our education system. And what I really think about our structure in the university world and in the sport world, and like we are expecting of athletes and what we are expecting of humans wanting to get an education and what they're putting at stake in order to get one, whether that's crazy, crazy loans or putting their bodies on the line. I can't even go down that rabbit hole. But the short, I'll answer with probably the answer. I'm going to give my answer and we can go where we want to go. But it's going to be a lighthearted answer. Um, but a lot of things that we initially have to talk about with former athletes is the difference in investing versus spending. Because something we often see is that the truth is that many, many former athletes, and this isn't even just former athletes, just people in general, we don't know what our net income is every month. We don't know what our total expenses actually cost. If I asked how much you spent last month on groceries, could you give me an exact number? Is it calculated? Could you, saying you, not literally you, but like there's this fear that like we do have loans and things are expensive, and we kind of shut down as a society when it comes to thinking about money. And so this is something I see really often. And so the first piece of advice, if I would dare give financial advice, I'm not a financial advisor, is to genuinely sit down and look at what your numbers are. Where are you spending? How much are you genuinely making a month? How much are you investing in yourself? And when I say investing, I don't mean in the stock market. I mean, like, what are you doing now for long-term goals in your physical health, in your mental health, in your financial health, in your relational health, right? So spending is like maybe going out and getting some stuff from Amazon, your subscriptions. Investing is maybe going to therapy or it's having a gym membership. And as a society, it's very normalized to spend. It's not normalized to invest. That was very long-winded, but I don't want to like go into the nuances. Like if someone's basic needs aren't met, we talk about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and they don't have food, shelter, safety, you can't even think about this stuff, right? Like if you genuinely cannot pay your bills, that's a whole different conversation than a former athlete who has student loans, they're on a payment plan, they're in their first job, and they're just kind of figuring out the world of paying for things on their own. That's two different conversations.
Absolutely. No, it's very different conversations. And again, going back to how each individual is unique and different that
Yeah.
way, I think that certainly applies financially. And to your point as well, we live in a society and culture that seems to just prioritize and emphasize the material objects and having things to be able to say that you have things. Or it's almost like this,
Yeah.
I can't quite understand it. I don't feel like this myself, but I've talked with some people that almost feel like it's like a bragging right to spend a lot of money on something. Oh, look at my new watch. Do you like it? I just spent 5 grand on it. Oh, do you like my
Mm-hmm.
car? I just spent $100,000 on it. And for some reason, we just think that the answer to everything is in the material object, or many people do. And I just personally don't feel that same way myself that way. And I think it comes back to your point about everyone being different. It's like, what do you value at the end of the day? Because if your
Yeah.
values are in the material thing and that's what makes you happy and that's what motivates you, like, I guess I'm technically not in a position to tell you, from a qualification standpoint, that that's the wrong way to look at things, but whatever. Versus like if your values are experiences and spending time with others, or maybe just the security of not being in a significant amount of debt. Maybe you don't have as much as you want, but you don't have to worry about, hey, home might get foreclosed or something like that.
Yeah.
Like it just comes back to what do you individually value and what makes sense for you at the end of the day, I think.
Totally. And something I talk about with former athletes specifically that we don't always realize is the things that it took to maintain a healthy lifestyle were typically included structurally at your university. Your things you weren't paying for that you had access to, or you were paying for, but not like directly from like a direct deposit then out, right? It was either through tuition, scholarship, a gym membership, so you have access to a facilities workout. So the schedule literally already prioritizes moving your body. Oftentimes there's some sort of meal plan or like stipend for food. You might have therapy on site on campus or like mental health professional, athletic trainers who are help you when you pull a muscle or if like your hips are sore, your back hurts, right? You can go to these resources. They're pre-existing in your life. But when you're an adult, the only thing that is included in your life is show up to work, leave work. Everything else you have to manage on your own. And that does mean investing in things that prioritize your health and wellness if you want to. A gym membership, sometimes physical therapy, health insurance, gear, literally gear. Because you were given like you were given like practice jerseys. You were given sometimes some schools were given cleats. I wasn't given cleats, but some schools had cleats. Like your uniform was given, dry fit was given. You have to buy that stuff for yourself as a former athlete, and if unless you prioritize it, it's not going to be prioritized. I had someone the other day, and again, do what you want. But she wanted to create some like realistic routines, wanted to work with me, and she was like, "Oh, I can't afford it." Like, no worries, totally understand. This world is literally insane right now. Post a photo of her getting a tattoo 5 days later, like a full arm tattoo. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Just be aware of the give and take. And I don't think we're always super aware of the give and take.
Absolutely. No, I think you're spot on with that. And it's a matter of, are you getting what you want now or giving up what you want the most in the long run for the thing that you can get right now, right? Like, hey,
Right.
I might not be able to get the results from this program immediately, but I can get a tattoo right now and be able to show
Yeah.
it off within a
Make
couple
me
days once I peel
happy.
back the wrapping,
Mm.
right? So it's certainly one of those things that how do I want to say this? I think again it comes back to the individual's preference and individual difference. However, we all also need to be aware that there is a difference between what we want the most in the long term and the time invested that it takes to get there versus the things that we can get right now and the satisfaction that they will provide. That concept of delayed gratification. And I know there's the whole study looking at that and all that's like super famous for like throwing the little like pretzel in front of the kids and like seeing how long they could wait before they eat it. I'm like very much paraphrasing that, but like essentially that concept of being able to kind of hold off and wait for the like bigger, better thing is often better for you as a person as opposed to just getting what you want now. And yet
Yeah.
in sport, almost nothing is given immediately. Like you're
No.
almost never granted that immediate satisfaction with almost anything that we do.
Yeah, it's interesting, the discrepancy that exists outside of sport with former athletes. And I believe part of it is like there are so many things that play into this. It's hard to invest in yourself for one. And when let me talk about just like getting a gym membership. Like you have to believe you're going to go. You have to believe that you are capable of following through at a gym membership or at the gym. And if you don't think that you're actually going to do it, you're going to procrastinate buying it. Or maybe your self-worth is in the toilet and you don't feel worthy of it. Or you're worried that you're not as strong as you used to be. People are going to judge you. Like there's so many things that play into this. And then our society as a whole normalizes, like we're saying, that like that quick dopamine hit. We are all glued to our phones. We all have Prime memberships. We all have the million and one subscriptions. Not everyone, but a lot of people buy from Shein. There's this like constant short-term fulfillment that we seek alongside. Yeah. And it's that like belief, like, are you willing to commit to it? One of the fun questions I like to ask people in not just like a sales call, but even in a conversation, like if I could snap my fingers and the results you wanted 6 months, you had them tomorrow, would you pay for them? And if your answer is yes, well, you just have to follow the plan for 6 months and you will have them. But there's most of us don't want to wait.
Right. No, you're spot on with that. And it's that concept of sometimes it's not the thing that you're after that gives you the most, but that process of waiting and getting to it, even as
Yeah.
hard and as difficult as that might be. I also realize this world of sports, athletics, kind of the personal side of it, the long term implications, and so on that way is so deep and vast. And it's something that we can talk about all
Yeah.
day long and still just scratch the surface. And that's obviously why you all have a program built out specifically to provide all these things for athletes because it is difficult, it is complex, and so on that way. Anything that we missed or anything else that you really want to bring up that way?
I heard a quote recently. I want to share with a quote. It was shared by someone that I work with really closely, and she asked who was in your front row? Like who has front row seats to what's going on in your life? The front row of the bleachers, because realistically, the people that are in the front row should be the people that are inspiring you to live the life that you want. You don't want those people in like 10 rows back. You don't want them in the nosebleeds. You want them on that in that front row. And we didn't talk about that too much in the context of like outside of sports, but ask yourself like who's watching, who's in your inner circle, and are they helping you create the life you want? And if they're not, what can you do to surround yourself with those people? Because it is so important to have that not just in sports, but in your personal life. So that's just
I,
like my final thought.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point because you become like those individuals that you surround
Yeah.
yourself with. So if you surround yourself with the right circle, everything else almost falls into place as opposed to surrounding yourself with the wrong influences. And it's funny to me because just thinking about like the concept and this rise of the transfer portal, if you will. If you don't like a
Yeah.
certain situation, you can pack up and move to a new one. Well, the same is true in life afterwards. Like if you don't like where you live, you can pack up and relocate and kind of start anew that way. It's not always easy to do, but you can always find a way to hit that refresh and reset button that way. So I think it comes back to not being afraid to take the jump, take the leap that way sometimes if you're not in the right situation and right environment for yourself. For people who want to find out more about you, the other Alyssa, and all the amazing stuff that y'all are doing with Beyond the Athlete, where can they find y'all at?
Website beyondtheathlete.net, or come hang with us on TikTok.
We do love the TikTok content, gotta
Yeah, the
say.
Clock app and I are becoming friends. Our handle is Beyond the Athlete.
We love
I
that.
would say those are good places to start.
We'll link.
We run everything ourselves, you know. So if you message, you're talking to us. When I say we, I mean the other Alyssa, myself, and one other person a couple hours a week. Like we are a small team, but we're mighty.
That's what it's all about. I love that. We'll link to that. We'll link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there and see everything Alyssa and the entire Beyond the Athlete team are up to. Alyssa, this is awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.